Coming in number 10, we've got the Pizza Party Dog Pile. What a place to start, am I right? It sure doesn't sound like a brutal kill. In fact, the way I've titled this one, it seems like something that might happen at your little cousin's hockey tournament. All fun and games until someone loses an eye, right? Or in this case, suffocates underneath an enormous man. See, Frank Castle and one of his many enemies known as the Russian have fought on multiple occasions. In this particular instance though, the Russian gained the upper hand. Pummeling the Punisher, things weren't looking too good for our revenge-fueled friend. However, as it often tends to happen, the fight got taken a little too far and the tables did turn. After tossing the Punisher into his neighbor, Mr. Bumpo's apartment, some improvised weapons were used. Hot, spicy pizzas to be precise. Castle tosses some of these molten meals into his adversary's face and then uses Mr. Bumpo himself as a smothering weapon. The rotund man makes for a great weight and the Russian gets stuck underneath. Adding a little assistance to the top of the pile, he stays there for a solid half hour. At that point, the Russian's breath is all but guaranteed to be stopped. Suffocation is a brutal way to die no matter how you slice it, but being assailed by someone else's dinner and then squashed under a huge friendly man? That's tough. And poor Mr. Bumpo, right? Unwillingly added to the fray as a weapon against a murderous madman by a murderous madman. And to make matters worse, Castle ensures the Russian's death by decapitating him. I'm sure that's an experience Bumpo does not look back upon fondly. Coming in number 9, we've got a bad day for Wolverine. If we're being honest here, I'm not so sure what a great day for Wolverine looks like. He's haunted by his past, traumatized by the experiments performed upon him, and all around pretty grumpy and surly. So a good day might just be an extra hot dog at dinner time or maybe a smile from a person he isn't totally annoyed by. But a bad day, oh boy, this one really takes the cake. The Punisher and Wolverine are technically on the same side most of the time, right? They're fighting for the good guys. Kinda. So one wouldn't necessarily expect them to go at each other, but it did end up happening. And in this fight, Frank Castle does not hold back. Where do I even start? Wolverine's face is ripped off, exposing the bare skull underneath. Ouch. Then there's the bit where Castle takes a shotgun and blasts Wolverine's, well, bits. That can't be too pleasant either. And to seal the deal, while Wolverine is crawling along the floor, Castle revs up a steamroller and runs it right over his mangled body. That's pretty far from heroic behavior, don't you think? Coming in number 8, we've got Redhead Ransom. I guess these days the goofy kids from Riverdale have a bit of an edgier reputation thanks to whatever the hell the good folks over at the CW are doing. Things get dark out there. Hell, there have even been little horror adaptations of the Archie comics, from mythical monsters to the literal predator. But did anyone expect Archie Andrews to be held at gunpoint by the Punisher? The all-American lad with a heart of gold? What did he do to deserve this? Well, as it turns out, he matched the profile of a notorious narcotics smuggler and salesperson known as Red. So the Punisher wasn't off his rocker in pointing a weapon at Archie. But still, all dressed up in his Letterman jacket, and then he's looking down the barrel of a deadly weapon. At least Castle didn't pull the trigger.
Number 7. Barbara Gordon. Alan Moore and Brian Bolland's infamous 1988 Batman and Joker centered story, The Killing Joke, had Joker do something most people just didn't expect. The crippling and violation of Batgirl, otherwise known as Barbara Gordon. The events of the story would eventually spur the newly wheelchair-bound Gordon into becoming the fan favorite Oracle. It was incredibly divisive and controversial. While it won an Eisner Award at the time and was critically lauded as one of the best Batman stories ever told, it has definitely changed the tone of Batman comics with Frank Miller's 1986 The Dark Knight Returns, sending the tone even further down to the dark rabbit hole. Writer Alan Moore has reflected on the story by saying, quote, "It is far too violent," and he called the book, quote, "a regrettable misstep on my part." For Batman, any harm done to any member of the Bat family is ultimately on his shoulders, and while she does not pass away, Barbara was crippled and forever altered by the event, something that haunts Batman forever. Number 6. Zur-En-Arrh. The Batman of Zur-En-Arrh was introduced in 1958's Batman number 113 as Tulano, who protects a faraway planet in a red, yellow, and purple Batman-inspired suit. While a dazed Batman pilots the Batplane over Gotham City one night, he finds himself transported to the world of Zur-En-Arrh by Tulano, and Bruce helps Tulano fight off alien invaders with Superman-like powers and then is transported back to Earth. Now, fast forward to Grant Morrison's run on Batman, and the whole adventure was revealed to be a hallucination caused by an isolation experiment on Bruce by the villain Dr. Simon Hurt. With Zur Zur-En-Arrh being derived from Bruce Wayne mistaking his father's last words, which were, quote, Zorro in Arkham, which is the show they had just watched before his parents were brutally snatched away from him. Using the trigger phrase, Dr. Hurt broke Bruce's mind and left him on the streets of Gotham. However, Bruce had developed a backup personality to bring the fight back to Dr. Hurt, the much more brutal Batman of Zur-En-Arrh. Number 5. Hush. Batman Hush in its entirety could be seen as a brutal moment. It strikes at the childhood life of Bruce Wayne himself, pushing Batman to a point we rarely ever see him go. In Batman issue number 614, right smack dab in the middle of the Hush story arc, Tommy Elliot, the childhood friend of Bruce Wayne, loses his life at what seems to be the hands of the Joker. All the years and years of distress caused by the Joker, the people hurt, the lives lost, they all fuel this insane rage inside of Bruce Wayne, who begins to lay a spectacular beatdown on the Joker, knocking out both Harley Quinn and even Catwoman, who both had tried to stop him. Batman almost goes to the point of permanently bringing an end to the Joker, beginning to put aside his morals to finally be rid of this homicidal plague on Gotham City. It's not until Jim Gordon intervenes while Batman has his gloves around the Joker's neck that the Dark Knight finally relents. The worst part is that if Batman did go through with this, the Joker wasn't even the one responsible for the crime in the first place. Number 4. Great White. Warren White, not Walter White, is a Batman villain who isn't exactly the most well known, as he is just really underused. However, his backstory with Arkham Asylum Living Hell is one of the most interesting villain origins of the entire roster of rogues at DC's disposal. Despite that, the Great White Shark's origins are so dark that it's really doubtful they will ever be adapted to the big screen, and that's because, well, it really ain't fun for the whole family. Just like everything else on this list, pretty much. Warren is sent to Arkham Asylum after pretending to be mentally disturbed to avoid a longer jail sentence, meaning he pled insanity. But he really did not know what he had just got himself into. Arkham is not the place you want to go to, even if the alternative is jail. The asylum and those who are, quote, treated there, put Warren through the ringer in every single way possible. This was bad enough, but it culminates in the criminal known as Jane Doe stealing his identity and leaving him in a freezer to perish. While Warren doesn't actually succumb to being frozen, he does have a number of his extremities, including his nose, frozen to the point that they fall off. This leaves White both physically and mentally traumatized, and understandably so. That's why the Great White Shark is how he is. Number 3. DAMIAN'S demise. The revelation that Batman was a father was something Batman was not quite ready for, but his attachment to and love for his son, Damian Wayne, was strong and has only grown over time. Missing out on key moments, the young Wayne had a lot to learn and had a mindset that Batman felt it necessary to correct through love, consistency, and hard work. Damian was becoming a fantastic Robin, even if he was a little smug and quite violent at times. He grew on many fans and on Batman himself, but just as Damian's mother had brought him into the world through deceit and villainy, she also played a key role in taking him out of it. Talia al Ghul and her forces invaded Gotham, and when Damian was taken out by his mad clone, the Heretic, Batman experienced a loss that affected him so strongly. He experienced a thirst for vengeance against all he thought responsible for Damian's demise. Eventually, that vengeance found its way to Apocalypse, where Batman faced down Darkseid to retrieve his son's body, but ended up reviving him instead, so it's all thumbs up. Number 2. Flashpoint Batman. When the Flashpoint universe was created, it changed a lot of characters. Possibly one of the most interesting ones was Batman, who in this universe is actually Thomas Wayne, with Bruce losing his life instead way back in Crime Alley, and Martha Wayne? She became the Joker. It's twisted and cool, and this Batman has a different moral code. Taking out criminals is not a problem, but when he finds out that mainline Bruce Wayne becomes the Batman, he deems this unacceptable and he tries to change his son's ways. Instead of being a nice father alongside Bane, he ruined Batman and Catwoman's wedding, causing her to leave him at the altar, nearly had Batman send Mr. Freeze to the afterlife for a crime he did not commit, kidnapped Damian Wayne, hired the KG Beast to take out Dick Grayson, he had Bane put Alfred Pennyworth in the ground, and then Thomas incapacitated Bruce with fear toxin and kidnapped him. He dug up the coffin of Martha Wayne, wishing to use the Lazarus pits to resurrect Martha so that they could all just be a happy family again. But this whole thing is super messed up, and it did not go the way he planned. Number 1. The death of Alfred. Like I said, instead of, I don't know, being a good father, Flashpoint Batman teams up with Bane to break Bruce. In 2019's Batman number 77, Alfred Pennyworth is taken out by Bane and Thomas Wayne, the Flashpoint Batman, in front of Damian Wayne's eyes. Bane and Thomas take Alfred hostage and warn the Batman family that if Batman comes into Gotham, Alfred is kaput. Instead, Alfred essentially sacrifices himself because he knows that Batman will not let Alfred get hurt. Alfred pleads with Bane, quote, not in front of the boy. But with a twist of his arms, Bane snaps the neck of Bruce's father figure and oldest friend. Bruce discovers the body of Alfred in Batman number 83, confirming that Alfred is in fact gone, and Bruce is beside himself with pain. As tears come to his face, he can barely even speak. Alfred's passing is complicated since he does come back as a villain later on. Now, Alfred's death is complicated since he does come back as a villain. Alfred is revived by a maniac named Brandon Crawford and brought back as, quote, Outsider. Outsider's radiation-exposed powers include telekinesis and having a nearly impenetrable stone body. He has none of Alfred's memories or personality, and his singular goal is to destroy Batman and Robin. The realization of who this villain is just adds insult to injury for Bruce Wayne, and it's very, very bad.
Number 10. Sins Past. One of the darkest Spider-Man moments to date that continues to haunt my personal nightmares is the revelation that came from Sins Past. This story starts in Amazing Spider-Man issue 509. During one of the worst flashbacks in comic book history, we learned that Gwen Stacy had an affair with Norman freaking Osborn, which resulted in a pregnancy. Gwen gave birth to twins, and their existence was forever kept secret from Peter Parker. Osborn raised the two children to hate Spider-Man, making them believe that Spider-Man was their father and that he killed their mother, when in reality, Osborn was their father, and although I guess kinda debatable, I think we could still argue that Green Goblin is much more to blame for Gwen's death than Peter is. This whole story was an extra level of dark and twisted that makes it both unforgettable and at the same time something you wish you could forget. But alas. Fortunately, it was retconned during Nick Spencer's run on Spider-Man, but it still represents a super big low for me and a terrifying point in Spider-Man's history. When we thought this was true. Also, Peter's reaction. No. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, be sure to show us you love us by clicking that like button. Seriously, feed the algorithm. Praise be the algorithm. Number 9. Loss of Iron Man. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, something that hit Peter really hard was the death of Tony Stark. Initially, it had been Spider-Man himself who had perished during the snap when Thanos kills basically half the universe using the Infinity Gauntlet. Peter was part of the 50% who lost their lives and seemingly got straight up dusted. He would return when Hulk used the Infinity Stones to bring everyone back 5 years later, but Iron Man would be forced to use them one more time to eliminate the past version of Thanos and his army. As Tony Stark is ultimately just a really smart human man, using the Infinity Stones to do something so great and so extreme not only took all of his energy, draining him, but ultimately cost him his life as well, completely depleting Tony. So he's completely out of the story now, at least for now. It's comics, so still anyone could come back at any time. This gave us a heartbreaking scene between Tom Holland's Spider-Man and Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man, where the two heroes once more were forced to say goodbye to one another near the end of Avengers Endgame. But with their roles reversed from Avengers Infinity War. You see what they did there? With Spider-Man being forced to say goodbye to his mentor as he passed on. Number 8. One More Day. After years of history and continuity, years of hurt and trauma and love and will they won't they in terms of Peter and MJ getting together and even staying together, all of the love and turmoil between them was lost with one silly little deal that was made with Mephisto. Such a silly deal. In exchange for Aunt May's life, MJ and Peter decided to sacrifice their marriage to Mephisto, who wanted it because he basically is a weirdo who is maybe prophetically threatened by the potential offspring of Peter and MJ for some reason. Because it's been implied before that, like, if they basically have a child, that child can destroy Mephisto? I don't know. This story is titled One More Day, but for many MJ and Spider-Man shippers out there, it feels like it should be titled Worst Day Ever.
Number 7. Arsenal. Justice League Cry for Justice is an honestly fantastic story, but it does Red Arrow bad. In one moment, the super genius criminal Prometheus lands a right hook on Red Arrow that was so hard, Arrow's right arm detached from his shoulder. This was bad enough, but Prometheus also orchestrated the events that led to the passing of Red Arrow's daughter, Lian. After these events, he became Arsenal, got a cybernetic arm, and also fell back into a substance problem that he had. One time, under the influence of the stuff, he thought he was protecting his daughter from 5 versions of the villain Prometheus, but in reality, he was just beating up some random people in an alleyway, and his daughter was actually a no longer alive stray cat. Batman showed up to beat some sense into Arsenal, but the damage was done to both Arsenal's psyche and readers' memories. Number 6. The Woman in the Refrigerator. Green Lantern stories aren't usually known for their darkness, but in Green Lantern Volume 3, number 54 from 1994, Kyle Rayner came home one day and found that his girlfriend, Alexandra DeWitt, had been extremely ruthlessly removed from life by the supervillain Major Force and then stuffed into their refrigerator. Kyle, sufficiently motivated by anger and regret, ended up stopping the bad guy, but some people have had enough. Specifically, DC writer Gail Simone. Gail, fueled by the image of seeing her favorite female character done so wrong, coined the term women in the refrigerators as a way to refer to comic book women who have been de-lifed and or had their entire lives ruined specifically in order to fuel the stories of superhero men. There are tons of other examples in comics of this happening, but this one may be the worst, hence the term. Number 5. Fall of Hal Jordan. Sticking with Green Lantern here, written by Ron Mars, the Emerald Twilight storyline did one good thing by giving us Kyle Rayner, but it did an absolutely dastardly thing by turning Hal Jordan into one of the most evil villains we've ever seen. It starts off already on the dark side when Coast City, the home of Hal Jordan, is destroyed. In complete agony over the loss, Hal tries to use his powers to remake the city and all its inhabitants. In his madness though, he goes and takes out every single one of the Green Lanterns, stealing their rings in order to try and make the whole thing a permanent stay. Now if we are going to pick one moment though, for me, the final fight with Sinestro is actually ingrained in my memory as being utterly horrible. There were no catchphrases, no jokes, no nothing, just a gritty whimper of a fight that ended with an incredibly harrowing snap. Number 4. Joker's face. In Detective Comics' Faces of Death and Batman Death of the Family, Joker had his face sliced off by the doll maker when he purposely got captured and sent to Arkham Asylum. Then he left it in his cell as a little gift for Batman and the police after he escaped. He would then go and steal it back and either staple it onto his head or strap it on as a mask, or sometimes he'd even take it off and play peekaboo with it. It's really messed up. Now the worst use of this would have to either be when he put the youngest Robin, Damian Wayne, with a bunch of dead birds and bugs and stuff and then terrified the Robin using his removed Joker face, or when he captured the entire Bat family and made them all think he had removed their faces as well. Absolutely terrifying. Number 3. The Killing Joke. The Killing Joke is one of DC's most groundbreaking Joker stories, but it is a Joker story, which means it is going to be messed up. In an effort to break Commissioner Gordon to prove his point that all it takes to make someone bad is one bad day, the Joker breaks loose from Arkham Asylum and attacks Barbara Gordon, the Commissioner's daughter, and who also happened to be Batgirl. The attack itself was incredibly visceral and it left Barbara paralyzed, but the worst part came later. When after kidnapping the Commissioner, Joker showed him pictures that he took of Barbara, scantily clad and implying a hell of a lot. While this book was incredible in a lot of ways, the writer, Alan Moore, says that this is one part he kind of regrets, and he places some of the blame on DC editorial, who encouraged and okayed him to go so far. Number 2. Bialia. If we are talking dark moments, there are 2 DC characters that always come to the forefront of my mind. The Joker is obviously one, he's already showed up multiple times on this list, but the other would be Black Adam. Black Adam does not give a damn. The only things he has shown to care about are him, his family, and his country. He has ripped someone in half as a warning to not mess with Kahndaq, he has obliterated Psycho Pirate's face for manipulating his mind, and he took on the entire superhuman community in the World War III event. But the whole catalyst for that last one was because he completely decimated the entire innocent population of the country of Bialia. And all because a group of villains had taken his family from him and he could not find them. It was only when he decided to try and head to another country that the World War III events started. And in at number 1 is Dr. Light. Okay, this one is kind of really hard to talk about. We are dealing with really mature subject matter, and it was handled in an incredibly bad way that led to absolutely nothing worth it. I'd give you a trigger warning, but I can't even say some of the worst things that happen in this story. Just know that if you choose to read Identity Crisis and the stories in relation to it, you've been warned. Sue Dibney is the wife of Ralph Dibney, the elongated man in DC Comics, and after her incredibly horrific passing, Dr. Light is accused of the crime. This is because it's revealed that Light had, to put it the only way I'm allowed to, attacked Sue in the past. The fact that he did this led the Justice League to okay Zatanna using her magic to give Light a mental lobotomy that wiped his mind and left him basically stupid. Batman discovered this, and then they did the same thing to him so that Superman would not find out. The whole thing led to nothing, and it was incredibly unnecessary. Coming in at number 10 is Injustice. Some of the best Superman stories have to deal with the Man of Steel going to the dark side. Ultraman, Superboy Prime, Superman Red Sun, all fantastic takes on the character, but, and this is an arguable point, the darkest and most shocking of these is Injustice. Sure, Injustice is based off of the Mortal Kombat-like video game, but it's just dark from the get-go. Thanks to the Joker, Superman is tricked into taking the life of both Lois Lane and their future. He then plunges his hand straight through the Joker's chest, just cementing the fact that he has gone overboard. But if that weren't enough, it's the way he dispatches the heroes who used to be his friends that will really get you. Burning Martian Manhunter alive and using his heat vision on Shazam's eyeballs are just 2 of the worst ones for me. Number 9. Frank Miller's work. Frank Miller wrote the groundbreaking comic The Dark Knight Returns in 1986, and it was truly something. While it was dark, it just offered up an amazing story and some crazy awesome scenes that people never knew they wanted. But it hurts a lot to say that its success unfortunately led to sequels. These sequels dropped in quality, both in storytelling and especially in art, but they ramped up the insanity. We had a Robin who had been completely neglected by Batman and went absolutely insane, and in another moment Wonder Woman and Superman end countless lives while they do the deed. Now, there is nothing wrong with superheroes becoming romantically involved. It happens all the time, but to have Superman, with his strong moral code, decide that he is going to fly around, crash landing into populated areas, causing earthquakes, hurricanes, and the evacuation of Hawaii, all while wrapped up with Wonder Woman, it's just dumb and really messed up. Number 8. Superboy Prime and Mr. Mxyzptlk. I usually pounce on any opportunity to talk about Mr. Mxyzptlk, but what happened in Countdown to Final Crisis between him and Superboy Prime? It just ain't it. Honestly, a lot of this 52-issue series is extremely dark. There are lots of lost lives and destruction signifying nothing and mostly ultimately ignored by the Final Crisis. But in Countdown to Final Crisis number 23, Superboy Prime abducts the 5th dimensional imp and takes him back to the source wall. Here, Superboy Prime uses an unreasonable amount of force on Mr. Mxyzptlk to find his home. When Mr. Mxyzptlk refuses, Superboy Prime uses his laser eyes to carve the Superman symbol into the poor imp's face. Number 7. Spider-Man Spider-Man and Mary Jane. Spider-Man is arguably the face of Marvel Comics, and for good reason too. He's incredibly inspiring, full of hope, and is never one to give up. For all those reasons, when Spider-Man Reign was released in 2007, it was incredibly hard to see an old, tired, and torn down Peter Parker who had pretty much given up. Of all the dark and depressing things in this story, there is one thing that stands above the rest. So, through the course of the story, we learn that Mary Jane, Peter Parker's greatest love interest, has passed away, and he's been hanging on to this memory of her, and that's likely due to the fact that he is directly responsible. Mary Jane didn't pass away because of a villain or Peter failing to save her. Instead, because of the radioactive spider that gave him his abilities, Peter himself was radioactive. Through the years and years that Peter Parker and Mary Jane had been together, Peter's radioactive body had essentially given Mary Jane cancer. We learn this as Peter is hugging her decaying body and bawling his eyes out. It's honestly utterly gut-wrenching. Number 6. Green Goblin and Gwen Stacy. Sticking with Spider-Man, because apparently putting Spider-Man through the ringer is Marvel's speciality, we have Sins Past. In this story, it was revealed that Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, who was a full-grown man at the time, had actually had an affair with the teenage Spider-Man's other love interest, Gwen Stacy. Not only that, but Norman actually knocked her up with twins. Norman whisked Gwen off to France so that she could give birth, but filled with guilt, Gwen decided to come clean and tell Peter Parker everything. But Norman was absolutely not going to allow that to happen, which was the reason that the Green Goblin, who had barely ever shared any comic time with Gwen Stacy before this point, chose to infamously put her life in peril, and it's the whole reason she lost her life in the first place. It's incredibly unnecessary and completely tears down the memory of Gwen. Number 5. Sentry and Ares. The Sentry is a character that deserves more light. The problem is he is kind of the most powerful superhero Marvel has. Obviously that's debatable, but this guy has the power to destroy pretty much anybody in the Marvel universe. For example, he has reassembled his own molecules and taken out the Molecule Man. But it's the fight between the Sentry and Ares, the literal god of war, in issue 2 of Siege that really left me sitting there going, did that actually just happen? Through the course of the story, Ares has been showing just how awesome he is, and he turns his sights on Norman Osborn, which unfortunately means Ares now has to face his friend, the Sentry. Sentry punches Ares halfway across Asgard, and maybe 2 or 3 punches later, he grabs both ends of the God of War and rips him completely in half. Not only did it leave everyone on the page frozen, it also left readers completely stunned. Number 4. The Hulk and Tigra. In 1995, Marvel released The Last Avengers Story, and with a title like that, from 1995, you can imagine it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Side note, the art in this comic is actually really good, which actually made it worse watching this version of the Incredible Hulk turn against his fellow Avengers, Wonder Man, Hawkeye, Mockingbird, and Tigra. Tigra against the Hulk is not a fight you would normally expect, and this Hulk tells you why, as in her attack against the Green Goliath, Hulk simply grabs her and pulls her apart just like Sentry did with Ares. Number 3. The Punisher. The Punisher could probably make up almost every single spot on this list, but that wouldn't make a very compelling collection of horrible moments, now would it? No. So, I'm going to pick just one. Punisher, being a regular guy, has to come up with some pretty inventive ways of dispatching criminals and super criminals. Usually that involves weaponry, but he's tossed a guy to a great white shark or to the wolves in a zoo, he's disintegrated the Hulk with magic, and even smothered a guy with a much larger guy. A close second is when he took down the Wolverine by parking a steamroller on top of him, but number 1 would have to be when he faced the entire Marvel universe. In this alternate world, it's a superhero battle, not crime, that brings a close to his family. Because of that, Frank Castle took down everyone. It's the final fight with Daredevil though that really hits. It's a slogfest, and Frank doesn't realize what he's done till Matt Murdock pulls off his mask before he passes on, which prompts Frank to turn on himself, leaving us readers feeling completely distraught. Number 2. Ultimatum. The Marvel Ultimate Universe. An ultimate collection of bizarre choices, really. Chief among them would have to be the event that was supposed to bring the universe to an end, but instead just did a whole bunch of really brutal stuff. And then it just kind of carries on. I'm talking about Ultimatum. In this event, Magneto, lacking any of his 616 universe counterpart's moral compass, flips the magnetic poles of the Earth. Now this causes incredibly bad weather, tidal waves, and the de-lifing of millions of people. But if that wasn't bad enough, in the ensuing chaos caused by the Ultimatum wave, the Blob devours Janet Van Dyne, Hank Pym in his giant form chomps the Blob's head off for revenge, Captain America ends up on life support, Thor trades his life and soul for Valkyries in the Land of the Dead, Magneto uses Iron Man's and Cyclops' power to brutally obliterate Wolverine, and then Magneto screams and raves until Cyclops blows his head off with an I-beam. It was all just a lot. And in at number 1 is Marvel Ruins. If you know Marvel Ruins, then you had to know that this was going to be number 1. This is a story taking place in an alternate comic book universe where literally everything that could go wrong goes wrong. Similar to Ultimatum, it's just kinda best to list off the events rather than get specific here. The Fantastic Four's spacecraft crashes into Earth and Ben Grimm is left with survivor's guilt. The Incredible Hulk is not so incredible as the gamma radiation he experienced leaves him as a hulking mass of tumors and deformity. Thanks to the radioactive spider, Spider-Man did not gain the abilities of a spider, but instead developed an incredibly brutal mutant virus that left him with a terrible skin rash and had him captured and quarantined by the government. The Scarlet Witch betrayed the Avengers to the government, leading to the Quinjet being blown up with them all inside of it. Nick Fury was introduced to the idea of eating other people by Captain America, Silver Surfer suffocated in space, Johnny Blaze sets himself on fire as a stunt and goes out in the same stunt, and Magneto's powers go out of control in an airport. The whole story just leaves you wondering what you're supposed to do with your life now. Coming in at number 10 is Adrian Toomes. Kicking off this list on the very mild end, we gotta start with the MCU because, as most of you know, the film and television versions of Marvel's universe have never and likely will never go to the dark depths that their comic counterparts will. Despite that though, the actors in some of these films can really serve up a small taste of darkness that can put a chill down your spine. For example, in Spider-Man Homecoming, the main antagonist is Adrian Toomes, the Vulture, played extremely and unsurprisingly well by Michael Keaton. In a really unexpected moment when Peter Parker arrives at his date Liz's house, he is greeted at the door by Adrian, Liz's father. Adrian drives the pair to their dance, and Toomes gradually figures out that Peter Parker is the Spider-Man. At the end of this car ride, Toomes actually pulls a weapon on Peter and very calmly threatens Peter with the end of his life and those he loves if Spider-Man does not back off. It's an incredibly well acted scene and makes you feel just how serious things just got for Peter Parker. Number 9. John Walker. Fast forward a little bit later on in the MCU timeline to the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Now this is after Steve Rogers has stopped being Captain America. Instead, John Walker has taken up the Captain America mantle on orders from the government. As comic fans know, John Walker is not the greatest guy around, and in the MCU, it's no different. Well, maybe a little bit more restrained. A little. In one of the most shocking and dark scenes from the show, from episode 4, after the Flag Smashers caused the passing of Walker's best friend Lamar, John chases down one of the Flag Smashers and in front of a crowd of people, he very brutally uses the shield of Captain America to bring the Flag Smasher to an end. The image of the bloody shield of Captain America is such a surprising thing to see, especially out in the MCU, and it's left everyone who saw this scene for the first time slack-jawed and lost for words. Hey guys, if you are enjoying this video so far, make sure you drop a like. One way to let us know that we are doing a good job. We very much appreciate it. Number 8. Brian Banner. Fans of The Incredible Hulk are well aware of how dark and messed up the character's past is. It's a partial reason that Bruce was able to become the Hulk in the first place. A large part of his darker past has to do with Bruce's father, Brian Banner. Brian was a less than ideal father figure. For starters, because of his job researching atomic radiation, he believed that his DNA was altered and that when Bruce was born, he was some kind of monster because of it. Brian also became jealous of how much attention Rebecca Banner gave to baby Bruce. Brian went pretty much insane, in other words. As some of you know, Brian became responsible for the passing of Rebecca Banner. On the anniversary of her funeral, Bruce was visiting her grave and Brian, recently released from the mental hospital, arrived. But Brian wasn't cured at all. He attacked Bruce, but all the years of torment had built up inside of Bruce, and in one kick, Bruce threw Brian off balance and he fell backwards, hitting his head off of the gravestone of Rebecca Banner and instantly ending his life. This moment was so haunting to Bruce that he just erased it from his own mind, convincing himself for years that his father passed due to a mugging.
Number 7. What if Daredevil's dad had thrown the big fight? This one actually comes to us from a comic titled What If?, starring Daredevil, the man without fear. But the question posed in the intro is, what if Daredevil's dad had thrown the big fight? Which is that's why I named the point that. It might not seem as dark as some other tales in the what if category, but the intro literally also poses the question in this issue. What if we shed a little light on the dark side of the Marvel Universe? And the story definitely delivers there, I would say. Here, Matt's dad takes the dive for his son and earns the money needed to send him to law school. Sounds pretty good. There, Matt meets Elektra. Also sounds pretty good. The two have a love affair that ends when her father is killed and they're both unable to save him together. Okay, it's starting to turn kinda dark. She leaves and Matt is then forced to deal with his own family tragedy as his father ends up in the hospital after a hit in a fight leaves him comatose. Okay, it's getting darker. Unable to afford the bills, he drops out of school and himself becomes a fighter, but when he is asked to take a dive for a paycheck, he refuses. As punishment, his father is killed, and Elektra returns to encourage Matt to seek retribution. This is where it gets pretty dark, I would say. Matt basically goes after Wilson Fisk with his intention to do it his own way. Now, he doesn't want to kill him, but he just wants to expose him for his illegal business dealings, which is a very Matt Murdock approach, I would say. In the end, though, Elektra kills Fisk for Matt basically during this confrontation, and Matt chooses to incriminate himself in the murder because he feels guilty about Kingpin's death. Yikes. Number 6. What if someone else besides Spider-Man had been bitten by a radioactive spider? This What If comic, issue number 7 from the original series from the 70s, actually has 3 stories in it. In one of them, Flash Thompson tries on the role of superhero, as he ends up becoming the one fatefully bitten by the radioactive spider that day in the science lab on the student field trip. And if you're wondering, well, Amanda, you know, Flash Thompson actually has been a hero. I know he's been a hero in the main continuity, but I mean, in this reality, he's trying on the superhero role of Spider-Man. He becomes Spider-Man and does his best to be a great hero, but actually dies during his attempt to be one. Sad. He fights the Vulture, and it's during a battle in the sky where the Vulture successfully manages to kick Flash off of him that Flash's Spider-Man falls to the ground. Unable to find much in the way of cushion or slowing his descent, the fall does him in, and Peter Parker finds Spider-Man in the alleyway, unmasking him to recognize the face of Flash Thompson, the ire of his high school experience. Now acknowledging the fact that Flash was Spider-Man though, Peter seems to forget all about this as he actually mourns the loss of Thompson, which makes it even more sad. Number 5. What if the alien costume had possessed Spider-Man? One of my personal favorites and definitely a dark story. This one involves Spider-Man being fully overtaken by his black suit after Reed attempts to remove it. In the end, Peter is drained of his life energy by the suit, which does inevitably leave him. Prematurely aged by this process, he ends up dying of old age, with Black Cat being the one to get revenge for Peter by killing the symbiote for good. It also features a very sad scene between May and old Peter, who poses as a colleague of Peter's from the Daily Bugle and basically comes to tell Aunt May before he dies how much Peter loved her. This sad and tragic what-if tale comes from issue number 4 of the 1989 comic series, if you would like to revisit it, as I have. Number 4. What if the Hulk had killed Wolverine? This story comes to us from issue number 50 of the first volume of the Marvel What If series. Here, Wolverine and the Hulk fight, as, you know, is common, but this time, during their, what I believe is intended to be their first fight, Wolverine ends up dead. This is all because Hulk is being used as a pawn by Forge's powerful nemesis, the Adversary. Very creative name, the Adversary. I wonder what that guy's about. Is he an adversary? He certainly is. In the end, Hulk threatens the lives of pretty much all of the X-Men, but does not end up killing them all. Once the Adversary reveals himself, Hulk attacks him, weakening him briefly, just long enough for Forge and Storm to basically escape his clutches. They strike back against him, and with Forge managing to cast a spell to defeat the Adversary and basically seals the Adversary off in another realm, banishing him from their reality for good. Still, while there are survivors of this battle, when Hulk transforms back to Bruce Banner, Bruce is confronted with the fact that he has taken multiple lives during this rampage, and that pretty much breaks Bruce, so I would say this is pretty tragic. Number 3. What if the Punisher had killed Spider-Man? This comic has maybe one of the darkest endings around. In it, Punisher is tricked into killing Spider-Man. He's promised basically funds to help him in his fight against crime and those who took his family from him, and Frank is also made to believe that Spider-Man himself is a criminal and is not actually a hero. However, after killing Spider-Man, Frank learns the truth. He manages to track down the man who misguided him, the Jackal, aka Professor Miles Warren. He figures out that the Jackal is Warren, and insists that they wait for the cops instead of just, blowing Warren away. However, when the cops do arrive, it's revealed what Frank's real plan is here, to basically kill the Jackal in front of the cops and in return be killed by the cops, believing he deserves himself to be punished for what he did to poor Spider-Man. This all goes down in What If, issue number 58 from the 1989 series. Does seem like a Frank solution to a problem where he blames himself or something. Number 2. What if Flash Thompson became Spider-Man? I was kind of thinking that maybe in this story, Flash, might get a break here. But even here, he has a pretty bleak tale attached to him in another alternate reality where he also becomes Spider-Man instead of Peter Parker. The story culminates in a heated moment where Peter discovers Flash's secret, that he's Spider-Man. Filled with rage, Flash doesn't listen to Peter's pleas for help and instead blames him for everything that has gone wrong in his life recently, shouting at Peter, "You ruined my life," before hitting him with a deadly punch that basically cost Peter his life. This story comes from the 2018 What If Spider-Man comic, and I would recommend checking this one out. It's wild. Number 1. What if Phoenix had not died? The title for this story makes it sound like it might even be a positive and happy story, but don't be misguided, it's not happy. Well, it starts off pretty optimistic with the Phoenix not dying but being redeemed and even helping to defeat Galactus. In the end, the Dark Phoenix power does consume Jean, causing her to turn on her teammates, so she becomes, dark again. She kills not just the X-Men, but the world in her rage and sorrow, with her anger and fire continuing to spread outward, engulfing the universe. So not only do her friends die, the X-Men obviously, the world, but the universe is also completely in danger. So yeah.
Number 10. Arkham Asylum. One of the great things about Batman compared to any other hero is the way his comics can lean really heavily on the darker aspects of human beings, and because of that, they can also get away with much more expressionistic art that can be really gorgeous while also being extremely terrifying. As an example, let's talk about the graphic novel Arkham Asylum. The gritty gothic artwork, which looks like it came straight out of my nightmares, meshes with the extremely dark, disturbing, supernatural themes of the story to take what is essentially just Batman going to work to secure Arkham Asylum into a brutal, mind-twisting funhouse ride. Batman takes on some of his most well-known foes here, but the fights aren't the compelling part, it's the sheer freakiness of it all. The real brutality of the story comes in its horror and the dark past of Arkham Asylum itself, which is slowly drip-fed to us as we make our way through pages and pages of the most terrifying Joker I have ever seen. It's messed up. Number 9. Face Off. Speaking of Joker, in Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo's Batman Endgame storyline, the Joker eventually kidnaps the whole Batman family and has an incredibly messed up dinner party. The Joker has Batman in a chair that, thanks to pressure plates, will trigger the passing of the whole Bat crew if he decides to get up. With each Bat family member wearing a bag over their head, Joker reveals their dinner, and it appears as though he has seemingly separated the skin from their faces and served it to them at the dinner table on ice, with all the Bat family members revealed to have bandages on their faces instead. It's honestly terrifying and super gruesome, but it is all just a ruse to try and break the Batman yet again. Instead, he proceeds to try and burn them all alive and then infects them all with Joker toxin, causing them to fight each other, distracting Batman from his fight with the Clown Prince of Crime. Number 8. Bane. There are many deranged and off-the-wall villains in Batman's rogues gallery, and while the Dark Knight has suffered losses and defeats at the hands of a few, none of those defeats are as infamous as the one he suffered at the hands of Bane. By issue 11 of the Broken Bat storyline, Bane had managed to find out that Bruce Wayne was indeed Batman. Bane surprised Bruce at his home, pumped himself with venom, and laid a brutal beating on the Dark Knight in his own home. The fight continued on into the Batcave, and completely taken by surprise, Batman is on his last legs when the venom-fueled tank of a man lifted Batman over his head and dropped him spine first onto his massive back-breaking knee. The brutal move captured in one of the most iconic panels ever put the Batman completely out of commission, requiring him to choose another to fill his role, role as a protector of Gotham until he could make his triumphant return.
Number 7. MJ and Peter break up. Again! As if it wasn't bad enough that MJ and Peter had their marriage erased years before, lately, in the last few years of the comics with Nick Spencer's run on Spider-Man, it seemed like we were building to have these two actually reunite. Yet shortly after they had ended up back together after years of being apart, following the complete erasure of their marriage, they were broken up again. And this happened as well after Peter was even considering popping the question to MJ. And to add insult to injury here, Peter also is greatly struggling in his personal life currently in the comics, while MJ is thriving and happy in a relationship with somebody else. I mean, hey, I'm happy for MJ, but honestly, poor Peter. It's just, why? Why can't these two be together? Just let it happen, Marvel. Just let it happen. Number 6. Creating monsters. It's hard being Spider-Man, not just in terms of all the heroics or all the people he has to save, all the responsibility he has as a hero, and even not just in terms of his own personal trauma and struggles. But one of the hardest things about being Spider-Man is the balance between the two worlds of Peter's civilian life and his heroic life as Spider-Man. It's a dangerous lifestyle being a vigilante, and either Peter Parker is often forced to lie to people in order to protect them, or to tell them the truth, but putting them potentially at great risk. That is pretty much what happened with Carly Cooper, Peter's one-time girlfriend, who all in all was quite a capable person, being a forensic specialist with the NYPD. Carly ended up being kidnapped by the Green Goblin, and after refusing to reveal what she knew about Spider-Man's true identity, was turned into a goblin herself with the Goblin Serum. She took up the name Monster for a while, and even after she was returned to her normal human self, was forced to leave New York in the end to create some distance between her and Peter after her traumatic experience. Number 5. CHASM. CHASM was once the hero Spider-Man, aka Ben Reilly. During the Beyond event, he ended up losing all his memories, or a lot of his formative memories you could say, and as such was sent down a dark path to becoming the villain known as CHASM, struggling to determine right from wrong since he'd lost all those formative memories during the event. He's called Chasm because the memories left a hole in his mind. It's like a chasm, you see. Number 4. Reign. This alternate reality and its Spider-Man story involves an old senile Spider-Man who lost Mary Jane to cancer years earlier, which he discovers his own radioactivity actually caused. He has retired from being Spider-Man and now owns a flower shop, but hallucinations and incessant injustices cause him to attempt to return to a life of heroics once more. However, Spider-Man is now an old deranged kind of man, and as such this story mostly involves him getting his butt kicked in between hallucinations of Mary Jane's ghost and rotting corpse. In the end, he does prevail, but not without us exploring the depth of his loss and his heartache. I think one of the darkest moments is when Spider-Man envisions Mary Jane's corpse emerging from her grave and entwining Spider-Man once more in her limbs, seemingly both kind of like embracing him, while also kind of like reprimanding him and accusing him of sort of causing her own death, which is kind of true. Although in the end, Mary Jane reveals even more tragically that she was always rooting for Peter, even with her dying breath, which also just makes this moment real sad. Number 3. Peter's ultimate death. While this death did not occur in the main continuity, it still represents one of the darkest moments in terms of Spider-Man's story, or at least one version of his story. We're talking about Peter's death in Into the Spider-Verse. This reality in the animated universe is still seemingly considered Earth 1610, which we know in the comics as the Ultimate Universe, though it does differ from the comic book version of Earth 1610. In this Earth 1610, Miles Morales also resides, though his Peter is somewhat different from his Ultimate comic book counterpart in terms of his story, and I would say his appearance. Peter Parker, who is blonde, dies during a fight with Kingpin here. His death is heartbreaking, not just for Miles, who now finds himself the only surviving Spider-Man in his reality, alone again after finding someone who he thought might actually be able to mentor him, but Peter's death here is also heartbreaking for his girlfriend Mary Jane, who only after his death reveals his secret identity to the world, and of course is super devastating for all of New York, and possibly I would say all of planet Earth, who knew him as their friendly neighborhood hero. Number 2. Revelations. As if MJ and Peter seemingly losing their chance at becoming a happy family wasn't enough, there was also the story and moment where we, the readers, learned the truth of what happened to Mary Jane and Peter Parker's seemingly unborn child, with it being revealed that their offspring was taken by none other than Norman Osborn for some insidious plot that, well, still has yet to be really revealed, even after like more than 20 years I believe it's been. We were led to believe the baby was spirited away by a woman working for Osborne, Alison Mongrain, and was perhaps still alive even years later. However, Norman would then go on to claim the child had been permanently eliminated on his order. Alison Mongrain slipped something into Mary Jane's food at a restaurant, causing her to go into early labor, and then disguised herself as a nurse and intercepted the newborn. Mary Jane was told her child did not make it, and this whole plot was honestly super messed up, and I still don't even really fully understand what's going on with it. This is seriously messed up even for someone as dastardly as Norman, to be honest. Number 1, on repeat. One of the darkest moments in all of Spider-Man comics doesn't even come from Peter Parker's time as Spider-Man, but instead is tied to another hero to wear the mantle, his clone, Ben Reilly. Ben Reilly at one point is caught in a loop, being killed on repeat by the Jackal as part of his wild experiments, and then brought back only to perish again. This experience would greatly affect Ben and is believed to be the catalyst for what drove him to become a villain himself initially, with him eventually becoming the new Jackal. I mean, now he's Chasm, but before he was Jackal. He just keeps having these sad villain loops, it's really tragic actually. Number 10, what if Daredevil killed the Kingpin? That's exactly what happened in issue number 2 of the 1989 series. Following the events of Born Again in this alternate reality, Matt Murdock loses his mind, driven insane as a result of being tormented by Wilson Fisk, which honestly makes sense to me. I know I would be driven insane if all of that stuff happened to me. This causes Matt to take the fight directly to Kingpin, who he simply takes out by shooting him. After this detail is exposed, everyone is basically on his trail, including Punisher and Spider-Man. When Matt goes to beg for Richard Fisk, Wilson's son's, forgiveness, even Hobgoblin gets involved in this fray. While Matt ultimately dies in the fight protecting Richard from Hobgoblin, Richard, in an unexpected twist, ends up carrying on the Daredevil legacy. Which I guess shouldn't be too unexpected if you know about, 2099, where it's kind of what happens in 2099. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why don't you show us you love us by clicking that subscribe button. Number 9, what if Spider-Man had joined the Fantastic Four? Now, you'd think this would actually be one of the happier what if stories, considering when Spider-Man started out, this was actually like one of his dreams to join the FF team, but he was denied it. However, in this universe, they do decide to allow Spider-Man to join them, making his dreams come true, but it actually ends up worse than if they just refused him like they did in the main continuity. I also think that this first issue of What If is pretty important, as it really sets the tone for what these hypothetical comic stories could be, a look into a much darker reality where not everything goes according to plan. But we don't have to really deal with the consequences long term because, these stories are like windows into other more distant worlds, so they don't affect our main world. We can kind of just see like, I wonder what that world would be like. Terrible? Yep. In issue number 1 of the first volume of What If, Spider-Man ends up joining the Fantastic Four team, which I believe they renamed themselves to the Fantastic Five. Still has a pretty good ring to it actually. When Susan Storm actually makes the suggestion that, maybe letting him join wouldn't be such a bad idea, so Sue is actually the one that kind of gets him on the team ultimately here. But in the end, this results in her feeling often left out, shunted from this team as a result of Spider-Man's impressive presence. He just completely outdoes Sue, so she feels pretty left out. This causes her in the end to choose to remain with Namor, ultimately leaving the Fantastic Five team, something for which Spider-Man blames himself and which leaves a massive hole in the team and a massive hole in Reed's heart. Number 8, what if Spider-Man became a murderer? This is maybe the brightest of the darkest what if stories that I have on this list, but it's still really dark, so hence why it's here, especially at the start here. In issue number 72 of the 1989 What If series, we answer the question, what if Spider-Man became a murderer? Dun dun dun! With him confronting the burglar who killed his Uncle Ben and losing control of his emotions, killing said burglar in turn. This, however, eats Peter up inside, and it isn't until Dr. Kurt Connors becomes the Lizard and decides to fess up to his own actions that Peter is actually inspired and is able to confess to the murder that he was responsible for and reveal that he is the one that's Spider-Man. He does some time, but thanks to him showing remorse, he only gets 5 years, and Aunt May is still waiting for him when he gets out with his costume. It's dark, but it's also kind of cute in the end, because I think one of his biggest concerns was that Aunt May would never love him again, and she is upset, but she eventually gets over it, and she's like, well, this is still my nephew, so kinda nice. Still terrible, but kinda nice.
Coming at number 7, apply directly to the forehead. Head on. You know the old commercial, right? Well, the Punisher decided to take that advice and run with it, although I kinda doubt this is available at Walgreens. See, the human skull is a remarkably strong thing. It takes a lot of force to cause damage to one, especially if you're running low on weapons and ammo. Thankfully, if you're extra resourceful, you might be able to find a solution to being low on head-cracking implements. Just use another person's head. Oh wow. The Punisher just straight up double grips this one guy's head and drives it full force into another dude's dome. It's not often someone can tell you that the last thing that went through their mind was someone else's. Coming in number 6, an Empire's State of Mind. Remember that scene where Batman tosses a guy from like the second story and his victim's like, oh, you're not gonna kill me from here, and Batman's like, yeah, that's kind of the point, I want to break your legs, not your neck. Good times. The Punisher is taking no chances. Legs may be broken, but they're not gonna get up. No sir. Somehow, someway, he brought one of his many marks to the tippy top of the Empire State Building. From my experience, the security around there wouldn't let a spandex-clad man with a skull on his chest carry a bound and gagged person to the observation deck, but hey, Frank Castle does what Frank Castle wants. So after hauling this poor guy all the way up, what does he do? Do they share a moment of mutual appreciation for the New York City skyline? Do they feed quarters into one of the many pairs of tourist binoculars up there? Nah, Frank tosses the guy off the side. And in the comic, it all seems well and good, like flipping a coin off the edge, who's gonna know? The Mythbusters aren't here to confirm whether or not something falling from that height would kill someone, but we can all assume that the man falling from height perished. However, what happened to his body? Did it smash someone's car, land in a dumpster, splatter all across a busy street? It's questions like that that keep me up at night. Coming in number 5, teaming up with EMINEM. Did you know that there was a run of comics where the Punisher kills EMINEM's team, listens as EMINEM raps entire songs to him, and then gets EMINEM to kill Barracuda? I'm not sure if this counts as super dark, but that is a very weird crossover. You know what? It is dark. I'm making it so. All those poor groupies gone in the blink of an eye. Then the Punisher has to deal with whatever nonsense EMINEM gets him involved with from then on. That's it for this entry. I wanted to bring up the fact that the Punisher and EMINEM had a comic series together. Thanks for listening. Coming in number 4, shark bait hoo-ha-ha. We've already touched upon the Punisher's almost religious use of improvised weapons. Pizza, skulls, car batteries, you name it. If it can hypothetically hurt someone, he's probably used it to inflict some serious damage, Phil Swift style. However, a lot of these weapons have probably been used by your average thug to similar effect. Maybe a little less brutal, but still deadly and painful if used correctly. But how many people can say that they've literally used a shark to kill someone? I'm sure there are a few, but the list can't be all that long. So of course, Frank Castle finds a way to utilize a deadly aquatic predator to take down a target. Legend. Noticing that one of the people he was fighting was missing a limb or two near the water, the Punisher got a gruesome idea. After attracting an enormous shark with some blood in the water, he pushes the poor guy in, and we get to see the moment it all comes together. In a flurry of teeth and fins, the criminal is mangled by a shark, and the Punisher simply looks on, satisfied. Coming in number 3, brutalizing Barracuda. Never a fan of underdoing a job, we've seen the Punisher really go to town on all sorts of rivals over the years. It's almost a challenge for authors behind the comics to come up with new and inventive ways to end lives through Castle's eyes. But when he finally gets his hands on longtime enemy Barracuda, the Punisher did not shy away. No sir, he turned that mess up to 10. After biting chunks of his face skin out, Castle goes in for the kill. Not immediately though, he really takes a moment to soak it all in. There are some gunshots and a nice little curb stomp, and then eventually a car battery is brought out. Uh-oh. Allegedly clamped down upon some unmentionables, the Punisher lets loose some insane electrical shocks that really get Barracuda going, and that's not enough even then. After some 15 minutes of agonizing electricity, he finally takes a pickaxe out and chops Barracuda's limbs and head off. That's just horrifying. At number 2, we've got Polar Bear Bloodbath. Now, most of what happens here isn't explicitly shown to the reader. We see Ma Nucci, famed mafia matriarch, appear to get back at the Punisher for killing her sons. However, doing so at the zoo was probably a bad call. The Punisher manages to maneuver the fight into a polar bear enclosure, and these beasts are not happy to have visitors. Dang, and all those Coca-Cola commercials convince me that polar bears are super chill. What do you mean a major corporation lied to me? Back to the matter at hand though, Ma and a couple of her lackeys are left to fight for their lives against enormous ice-faring predators, and they don't come out the other end looking too pretty. Ma in particular is in pretty bad shape, missing her arms and legs. What she isn't missing, however, is her attitude. And finally at number 1, into the fire. And this is a fun one to end on. After putting Ma Nucci through that animalistic encounter, the Punisher had to make sure he finished the job. Just going in and killing her wouldn't be enough though. In fact, to him, that would almost be a mercy. No, he's gotta raise the stakes, as always. So after the entire ordeal is as good as done, he decides to set fire to Ma's mansion with her still in it. She's a feisty one though, and makes it out of the fire one last time. Crawling towards Castle in one final desperate attempt to kill him, she performs what I can only describe as that move that Pokemon do when they run out of PP to use. Struggle. The Punisher sees this, lines up a nasty kick, and sends Ma flying back into the Inferno for good. Sheesh. What a lunatic, am I right? Who else could get away with all this horrific stuff and still be so beloved? Only Frank Castle.